Some of the best lessons I've learned so far as a software engineer haven't necessarily come from textbooks or courses, but more so my work, colleagues, and plain old trial and error. So today I'm excited to talk about some of the lessons that I learned on my first software engineering job that have sort of shaped me into the developer that I am today. Hey everyone, I'm Bree and welcome back to my channel. I hope that you guys are having an awesome day. And if this is your first time seeing me, hi, I'm Bree and I'm super excited to have you here. On this channel, I talk about my experiences as a software engineer, as well as little tidbits and tricks for anybody who is looking to make their way into the tech industry. So little lessons can really be hiding around every corner, and I am excited to share some of the lessons and things that I picked up on my first job as a software engineer. So before I go ahead and get into it, I do just want to say that there's timestamps in the description in case you are looking for a lesson in particular. So the first one that I want to talk about is the difference between working on your own versus working on a team. This is something that I sort of knew in the back of my head, but I didn't actually understand until I actually started working on a team. So when we start coding, a lot of us, or most of us, I would say, are definitely more solo in our learning and solo developers in general. And as we're solo developers and we are the people who are maintaining our own individual code bases, I think sometimes we can sort of forget that eventually we'll be working on a team. At least I did. And there are things that are different when you are working individually. And you have more control over things like your system design or more opinionated pieces of your code that you might have as a solo developer than when you're working on a team of people. So something that I found that I really had a problem with at the beginning was having code structured the way that I liked it. And of course, this is a really big opinion. Every developer has a different way that they like their code to be structured. But when you are working on a team, you can't just rip out code and structure it the way that you want to. You're also not going to be specifically working on a brand new and fresh code base. A lot of times you're going to be working with a mature or established code base that's already there and already has its own nuances and basically its own ecosystem. I personally am someone who likes to have everything formatted the same way just because it feels better, it's formatted better, and it just makes my brain feel really happy. But typically, if you want to refactor things, they have to fit into a schedule. So if I was a solo dev, I would just refactor what I want to when I want to because I'm not really on a schedule for the most part. But a lot of times that has to be factored into release schedules or feature schedules when you're working on a team. One of the other big differences that I noticed as working as a solo dev versus working on a team is really communication. When you're working by yourself and with yourself, you don't really have to do a lot of communicating between another team or another person because you're the person who's in charge of your code, and you don't really need to communicate with yourself very much because you are yourself. But it is so important and actually takes up a very good majority of my time. If there's one thing that actually takes more time than coding in my everyday job, I would definitely say it's communication. The second big lesson that I learned is documentation is key. Documentation is really more than just an inline comment in your code explaining what like a single line does. It's actually very important to understand how to document your work. So documentation, of course, is for yourself so you can understand what you were doing. There's definitely been times where I wrote code and then it's been 3 or 6 months or however long, and I look back and I'm like, I don't even know what I was trying to do or what I was trying to achieve. But a lot of times documentation is really for other people to understand what your thought process was or what your goal was or what you were actually trying to achieve when you were writing your code. So documentation, like I said, is more than just an inline comment in your code, but you should also talk about the flow and structure of your code, or if you have to make design decisions, help others understand what brought you to those decisions. So the docs that you create will allow for open knowledge access, but they also remove you from being a single point of failure if something should go wrong and you're not around to help. They also empower other developers to be able to work on or work with your code without physically needing you to explain things to them. The third thing I learned, and I definitely knew this going into my first job, but it really became evident once I started working, and that is learning is a huge part of the job. There will never be a moment where we know absolutely everything as developers, and that's something that we really have to embrace. So while my main skill set has remained the same pretty much over the years, I've definitely learned and acquired a lot of new skills along the way. If you know anything about my journey through Ravager, then you will know that I sort of started with full stack development and mostly using Angular. And when I first started my first job as a software engineer, I started using Angular, but then I actually had to switch to AngularJS. And after I used a little bit of AngularJS, I had to switch over to React. Now, the common thread between these different frameworks is that they are front-end web development frameworks that mostly use components. So that thread of knowledge sort of traveled with me, and it made it a lot easier to learn other libraries since I already had a solid foundation in Angular. So the solid foundation part is really what's important. As long as you have a good foundation in one or two languages or technologies, I think it definitely becomes a lot easier for you to learn and pick up others as you need to. So because learning is such a huge part of our job, understand that you don't have to be an expert at everything. And again, we will never be an expert at everything, and we shouldn't strive to be. So this is actually one of the biggest mistakes I made when I was starting to learn how to code. I remember looking at job applications and thinking that I had to be an expert and know everything about all of the technologies that would be listed on a job application, and that is absolutely not true. So on the flip side of this, because we're always learning and we're always picking up new skills, I became very good at researching. So that leads me into my fourth point, which is actually I learned how to ask questions. So before I started my first job, thinking about how to Google search the problems that I was having, I felt at times I was very frustrated because I wasn't finding answers for either the errors or the process that I was trying to complete. And asking questions may sound like something that's basic, but learning how to frame good questions and find answers for the problem that you're trying to solve is actually very important. It can be so easy for us to just paste an error and say, oh, our code's not working, but in reality, that probably won't be very helpful to us. So here's the formula I sort of like to use when I am generating my questions and trying to get all of the meat and potatoes in there. So the first thing I do is describe the error that I'm getting as well as I can. I use screenshots, GIFs, videos, and of course code snippets if I can at all. The second thing I like to do is describe what I'm trying to achieve. This can really help people understand sort of like where you're trying to go with the problem that you're having or with the question that you have. And it also allows them to sort of steer and correct you if you might be thinking one thing and in reality something else is true. I also like to document the steps that I took to reproduce the error. That way other people can try it and determine if they're also seeing the error or not. And lastly, and I think this is one of the most important parts that I didn't really catch on to until a little bit later in my first job, was documenting things that I've tried to solve the problem. That way you don't get tons of comments with things that you've already tried, and people can already see where your thought process was or the direction that you were going in. So don't be afraid to ask questions, whether you think it's stupid. It's not stupid, but even if you think it's a stupid question, ask it anyway, because somebody might have that exact question that they didn't know that they wanted to ask until they heard you ask it or saw that you asked it. The fifth thing that I learned, at least for myself, is that time estimation was pretty difficult at the beginning. One of the biggest changes I experienced from going from being a solo developer to working on a team is when people ask how long certain tasks will take. And I never wanted my tasks to seem like they took a lot of time, and I always wanted to get them done as soon as possible. So what usually ended up happening is I severely shorted myself on the amount of time that I said I would need versus the actual time that I needed. So time estimation may seem like pretty simple. I think for the most part, a lot of times we know how long certain tasks will take, or we know our work ethic and how fast or how slow we work. So if you've never heard about it before, time estimation is pretty important, especially for project managers when they are determining the timelines and release schedules for your application or whatever project you're working on. So they basically use your time estimations along with everybody else's time estimations on the team to provide stakeholders with accountability calendar or like a schedule of events that they can expect. So in my case, I would say, oh, this task sounds pretty simple. It'll only take me like 4 or 5 hours, basically like a half of a day. But what I didn't factor in is the time to develop the solution, the time to test the solution, the time to create or edit test cases, having to send it over to QA, and fingers crossed, hopefully not getting any big notes or changes back. From there, you definitely have to create a pull request so that you can merge your code in. And then by the time all that has passed, it's probably been a week or two. So what I thought was probably a 4-hour change really is like a 1 or 2 week change, even if it's small, depending on the size of your team or the process that your team uses. So I definitely joke sometimes and say that when you are estimating your time to double it and add tax, but in all seriousness, even though you are developing a solution, it takes a whole team to solidify that solution and deploy it. So those are the big lessons that I learned so far as a developer, but what about you? What's your favorite lesson that you've learned? Let me know in the comments below. So if you like this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. And if you are subscribing, be sure to turn on those notifications so you can be notified every single time I post a video. And with that, thank you guys so very much for watching. I hope that you all enjoyed, and I can't wait to see you all in my next video.